work session to order. It's awkward looking at it from this angle, but we'll start off with Mike Poston and Chad Meadows and recodify cachers.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners. I know that Chairman Letson and Commissioner Jones have taken part in some of the meetings that we've had up in Cachers over the last several months, but what I want to do today was have Chad, our consultant, Chad Meadows, our consultant with Code Right Planning, give you an update of where we are on the recodification process. This was a project that that was approved last year and in the current year's budget to be undertaken to rewrite the entire code for cachers, as it's been 20 years since the code was originally adopted, and a lot of things have changed, including the cachers area. And this is an implementation of the work we did with the small area plan process in cachers with community input and the Urban Land Institute process that the chamber sponsored and the county participated in a year and a half ago. So all that information is the basis for what we've asked Chad to come in and do this project. So without further ado, I'll introduce to you Chad Meadows with Code Right Planning, and he's going to present you with what we've done so far and where we're going with this project. Chad.
Thank you, sir. Afternoon. I'm Chad Meadows, and I am principal of Code Right Planners. So my firm is in Durham, North Carolina. I have not met you before, so I'll just quickly introduce myself. I was born in High Point. I grew up in North Carolina. I've been an urban planner for about 30 years, and I've been drafting development codes for about 20 some years of that. So this is my, I'm not sure, I think it's my 20th, maybe 23rd set of development regulations that I've drafted in my career. And I surely do appreciate you guys taking some time to talk with me today. I wanted to introduce myself and then talk a little bit about this project, let you know what to expect and the things that we've done up to this point. So with that, I will just scroll on down to the project status slide. So you see on the screen here a wheel that shows the 7 steps in the process. So as Mike mentioned, we are basically we're overhauling the development regulations that apply in the Cachers commercial area. Now, there are a couple other minor changes that need to take place in other parts of the UDO that pertain to Cachers, and that'll be part of this effort. But mostly we're just focused on updating the procedures and the rules for new development in the Cachers area. We started this project around about January, maybe it might have been the end of last year, and we've been working on this project for the last 5-6 months. We are currently in the annotated outline stage. The annotated outline is basically a roadmap for the changes that we think need to be made to the county's UDO. A couple of things I wanted to mention about this process. We have focused on input and interaction with the community. Thus far, we've had 4 meetings with the CPC down there. We've had 3 public forums. I've conducted, I think, something on the order of 15 office hours meetings, 6 or 7 different presentations. A lot of this information is set down for you on the project webpage, which is www.recodifycachers.com. So all of the draft work programs, presentations, trip notes, all that material is there if you ever have a desire to have a look at it. Where we are with the project is we believe we've gotten the community character defined. And what's interesting about that is that this is a slightly different approach. We want to use community character as the primary review criteria for new forms of applications. Okay? And I'm going to talk to you about some of the big sort of ticket changes that we think we want to suggest to you over the coming days and weeks as you guys begin to move into consideration of this. Before I do, I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts with you about kind of my philosophy, my team's philosophy on development regulations and what modern development regulations do to be effective. First and foremost, we really try to be clear about what the expectations are in the codified language so that the applicant knows what to expect, the staff knows what to expect, the neighbors know what to expect, so that there's no surprises. You may not like what you read, but you're not going to be surprised by it. Further, everybody can hopefully agree on what the language says, which isn't always, sounds easy, but it doesn't always work out that way. One of the things that we've learned over the years is taking the time up front, like we're doing now, to identify preferred forms of development. Kinds of development that the community says, we want this. This is the kind of stuff we're looking for. And then we make those kinds of developments easy to do. That we don't put up roadblocks and obstructions. We remove obstructions from preferred kinds of development and make that the path of least resistance. That's been a pretty effective approach for us in other communities, like Jackson County and like Cashiers. You got to have some flexible alternatives. One size doesn't fit all, and incorporating some flexibility into the provisions to encourage good development or preferred forms of development is important, and you should look for and will see inclusion of some flexibility mechanisms in these revised draft standards we'll have before you in a few months. One thing we've talked quite a bit about, and I'm sure you're aware of it, is a desire to move away from the current special use permit procedure for larger developments. That has not served the community well, nor has it served the county well, and move towards a sort of a conditional rezoning process, one that allows this body to use its legislative discretion in negotiation and decision-making processes. The conditional zoning process is going to give you and the CPC and the planning board the opportunity to speak with applicants, okay, which you can't do now. It gives you the opportunity to speak with the community, which you can't do now, and it gives you the opportunity to negotiate. And those are three pretty important things, particularly when it comes to these larger developments. 9 times out of 10, the folks who are bringing those developments, it's not the first time they've gone through the development review process. They know what they want. They know what they're looking for. You guys know what you're looking for, and we can just dispense with all the silence and the ex parte communication barriers that we have and get right into negotiation and discussion, which is how most effective local governments do these kinds of projects anyway. So you guys came to this on your own. You didn't, that's not a new concept that I've brought to you. You guys, I think, were already moving down this road. Me and my folks, we're just here to help you guys get there and in a way that makes the most sense. Finally, including illustrations, measurable review criteria, and very precise language, okay? So that, again, everybody can agree on what the code says. You may not like it, but we don't have to have a debate about what the language says. So these are kind of hallmarks, things that you should be looking for in the draft regulations that are going to be coming your way. These clear expectations and flexibility and measurable review criteria, these are going to be the stuff that you'll see before you. So let me talk just quickly about some of the anticipated areas for change here, things that we would think are going to change with these draft regulations. The first being, obviously, removal of the special use permit process. We're not going to abolish it. There are a handful of uses that you really do need to keep a special use permit process around, things that are federally protected, et cetera. Likewise, because this body doesn't have time or the inclination to hear every single application that comes through the process, we anticipate also broadening the range of applications that will be reviewed and decided by staff, okay? So what's happening is the CPC will be moving out of a development application review role. They'll still be making recommendations, but they won't be making the decisions. There'll be increased authority for staff to decide the smaller applications based on the clear guidelines we're going to set down in the code. And these larger things, these conditional rezonings, they'll go to CPC for recommendation, they'll go to planning board for recommendation, and then they'll come to you, okay? The CPC will be freed up to focus more on the regulations themselves. We are not so foolish as to believe we're going to get this 100% correct the first time through. We're going to be tweaking some things, turning some knobs, twisting some dials, and that's really going to be where the CPC can come in. They'll have an opportunity to work with those regulations, tweak them based on what they're seeing, and hopefully, increase their efficiency. So that's the process side of the changes. We expect some changes to the districts. As you guys know, there are two sub-districts in the Cashers commercial area, the village commercial and the general commercial districts. There's not a lot of distinctions between those two different districts. The range of uses is basically the same. The dimensional standards are basically the same. The key differences are the size of the development proposal that triggers the special use permit process. That's really the key difference between these two sub-districts, which is great, except when the special use permit goes away, we don't need that distinction anymore. So we're hoping to rezone the land that's inside this commercial area to one of three new sub-districts, either a mixed-use sub-district, a commercial sub-district, and a residential sub-district, okay? 37 to 42% of the land uses that are inside the Cashers commercial area are residential in nature, yet they have commercial zoning, which, you know, that's a mismatch that we should be addressing in this project. I mentioned the conditional zoning district. That's something that we'll create. That's an option. It's a voluntary kind of thing. It'll be for the largest forms of development. We're still trying to line up what are those size thresholds? What are those triggers going to be? But they're certainly going to be larger than the 4,000 and 6,000 square foot numbers that you're working with today. They'll be higher than that. What exactly that'll be, we're still working on it, but it will be higher. We'd like to encourage some mixed-use development by right, mixed use being, you know, residential and non-residential use types in the same building, at least in the kind of the core, the crossroads area, allowing those kinds of mixed uses by right, and a wider range of residential use types generally, something that the community has expressed a desire for. Housing very expensive, difficult to find. There's not enough opportunity for seasonal workers, for folks who live there but maybe aren't of such high means. So we want to address that and create some more opportunities for folks to be able to live near or in the Cashers commercial area. So those are the changes with uses, okay? Just a couple more slides here. I mentioned community character before, that we're spending a great deal of time trying to figure out exactly what the community character is. We're doing that because we want to use community character as the basis for the review criteria for new applications. So an application is going to come in and staff or the CPC and you will make decisions on those applications based on its consistency with the codified community character. So that's a series of bullet points and a series of annotated images that explain what the community character is. And it'll be the applicant's job to defend or explain how their proposal meets those criteria. And you guys will be in the driver's seat with respect to whether or not you agree with that applicant. Some new standards. One that is important is open space. Now, you guys already require open space for residential subdivisions. What we would suggest be done is that we broaden those requirements and require open space across the board. And that we kind of tweak what we think of as open space. Right now, today, open space is environmentally sensitive areas and/or active recreation. And that's good. And we wouldn't change those things. But what we might consider adding to that are other things that are helpful to village kinds of atmosphere development. Things like outdoor dining, things like gathering spaces, public plazas, performance spaces, the kinds of things that you find, you know, in a village environment, and creating some opportunities for people to provide those, or incentive for people to provide those, much like you do with sidewalks in the area today. So really just incentivizing open space and trying to create opportunities for people to gather and give applicants credit for providing those kinds of things. It's no secret that the traffic congestion is a real problem in Cashers, particularly in season. It's also no secret that we don't really have a lot of levers to push or pull when it comes to dealing with that traffic. Some of the things that we can do are to create some alternative routes through additional new streets provided by the private sector. Another thing we can do is create land uses where people don't necessarily need to get in their car. That's the mixed use side of the equation. We can also create ways to make it easier for people to walk or ride bikes via pedestrian connectivity rules. So some new standards for street and pedestrian connectivity, shorter block lengths, requirements for more roadways, requirements for sidewalks and trails, okay? Flexibility, I mentioned at the head of the presentation that having flexible regulations is important. One size doesn't fit all, and you really want to reward those folks who are providing things that you're looking for. So a couple of things that we think we might include or suggest be included are sustainable development incentives, giving applicants additional density or additional height or waiving some other requirements if they voluntarily decide to provide quote, sustainable development features. What might those be? Might be tree protection. They might volunteer to save some extra trees. They might decide to have an Energy Star building. They might decide to use low impact development in their parking lot to better handle stormwater. A variety of different things that are all voluntary that they can choose to provide, and we'll craft the standards to reward them if they make those choices. Do they have to do that stuff? No, they don't. But if they choose to, there should be a reward for them to do that. And that's what the sustainable development incentives do. You have an administrative adjustment process now. That's where staff can make some very, very small, minor changes to things like the number of parking spaces that are required or setbacks, et cetera. We think that makes a lot of sense, and we would encourage the continued use of that kind of approach as a safety valve to help make sure that development applications that come through the process can do the kinds of things we want them to do, save trees and put in sidewalks and pay for new streets, et cetera. And so we're trying to give them some flexibility in return for that kind of a relationship. So those are really the big picture changes. Kind of where we go from here. We are refining these community character standards. We've got a meeting tonight with the folks in the community to talk about the community character standards that we've gotten up to this point. I don't think it'll be done yet. I think there's going to be another iteration. We'll continue to tweak these and refine them in pursuit of the comfort level that we feel like we need for these standards. The annotated outline, the roadmap for the standards, I expect to be done with that next month. And that'll be kind of the blueprint, the roadmap, the recipe, whatever you want to call it, for how we'll make changes to Section 9.3 of the UDO and the handful of other sections that will also need to be changed. We expect to have an initial draft assembled and through staff review by August of this year. And hope to have the rezoning and the text amendment to the UDO in front of you by October. So that is our time frame. We think it's doable. I have to commend your staff for, it's just utmost professionalism and its commitment to making sure that, we have an inclusive process. That has been the watchword for the project the whole way through. It has served us well to this point. I think we've established a really good trusting relationship in the community. There's a lot of divergent views and a lot of different opinions about how the world works down there. And so far, we're, all still singing off the same sheet of music. And part of the reason for that is we've been very transparent and we spend a lot of time making sure that we're talking to people and folks have an opportunity to come and share their views. So, so far so good. The detailed parts are coming, but we're confident with what we've got, and we're confident that we'll have this, to you guys by October. And I'm happy to try to answer any questions.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, it's Mark Jones.
Yes.
Mr. Meadows, I heard you at the very beginning talk about a link with codified cashier's information. Mm-hmm. Is that on jacksonnc.org site?
No, it's its own website. We maintain it, but there should be a link from the Jackson County homepage to it.
The planning department homepage.
Thank you.
Yeah.
From the planning department homepage.
So a citizen could go to the jacksonnc.org, go to the planning, and then there would be a link to codified cashiers. And can they give their comments online?
Absolutely. There are 2 locations where they can provide comments online.
Okay, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Any additional questions from the board?
No, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Meadows.
Thank you very much. Look forward to
Yes, sir.
seeing you in the coming months.
Moving on now to Ms. Alm in the Transportation Department.
Good afternoon, Chairman Letson and Commissioners. The first thing that I want to talk about, my presentation today is for the Jackson County Transit Title VI Plan. I do have a couple corrections for you I'm going to pass out, and for those that are remote, you will have an email from Ms. Winchester. So the reason behind why we have to go through this process with the Title VI plan is that Jackson County Transit is a recipient of federal transit administration funds, and that's administered through the NCDOT Integrated Mobility Division. So we have established this Title VI non-discrimination plan for the purpose of complying with the Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So this particular document details the non-discrimination program, policies and practices administered by transit, and we have to review those and update that plan every 3 years. This is actually a template that is provided by NCDOT, and what we did in order to be compliant is, number one, we changed the Title VI plan coordinator, which actually the transit director needed to be updated for that, and that would be me. And then the service area population tables, those were updated based on the latest census data. And so you guys, we are presenting this to you in hopes for approval as a requirement for NCDOT to be approved every 3 years. Are there any questions on this particular plan?
Ms. Alm, the only question I had was regarding in your race and ethnicity, the percentages. When you look at African Americans at 850, it's 79.6%.
That is one of the corrected areas on page 23.
Okay.
And that actually percent needs to be corrected as well. So the Caucasian population should be 34,205, and the Black or African American should be 850. But those percentages need to be corrected to correlate with the actual number. And so those numbers can be sent with you with the updated version.
Okay. Any additional questions from the board?
I did want to note that on page 23, that same page, where the age and sex, it's just interesting to note that the 65 years and over is almost a flat number compared to the previous census.
Amen. any additional questions for Ms. Owen? I think there should be a consensus to move this to the next meeting for a vote. Is there any additional opinion on that?
I concur.
I agree.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ms. Owen. Are there any additional questions? If not, we'll move on to Mr. Adams. Do you have something?
No, this seems a little off. I'm actually for the third item.
Okay.
Myself and Ms. Winchester, just basically talking to the board about your process for volunteer appointments.
Perfect. All right.
Thank
Well,
you.
then we'll move. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. We'll move forward with that. And Mr. Adams.
So, yes, sir. So this is really just, I put this on the work session agenda so that the board can just have a conversation amongst yourselves and along with your clerk to the board and along with myself about just the appointment process. And so what you do have included in your packets is a couple of things you saw. The first item was just the general application. And then the next item that you see attached is the actual volunteer application form that a lot of people hear us refer to. Has the potential applicant been vetted, meaning an applicant or a volunteer who's volunteered to be on a board. Well, this is the application that we're actually referring to that the volunteer has to fill out and ultimately allows for consent to perform background checks and things of that nature. So just so that everybody knows how this information is used, let's just say there's a particular individual that you as a board or you as an individual commissioner are interested in appointing. And just a reminder, you have specific appointments. As board members, you have specific appointments that you make in which the entire board has to vote on, but generally that's nominated by that particular commissioner's appointment. And then there's just general appointments that you as a board are required to fill. And I'm not sure if I'm online right here, but what I do have here is it's just the board book, the boards and committees book. We do have a summary of all the boards. I believe Ms. Winchester had shared with you all when you first got elected, and that was a couple of years ago for you, Tom, and for you, Mark. But ultimately, it does provide a list of all the boards, the appointments, the times in which people's appointments are becoming due. And then, so let's just say you as a board member, you're aware that one of your appointments are coming due and you found somebody interested, and you asked them to come in and not only apply, but this first application, but you wanted to go ahead and take them through the vetting process. Well, I just want to make sure everybody understands what happens with this vetting process. If the background comes clean, then ultimately just proceeds forward, and then you hear Ms. Winchester say everything's fine. If something does come up on the background, that doesn't necessarily preclude a person from actually being appointed. What I do is share that information with the individual commissioner who's interested in appointing that person. This is very specific if this is to your appointment. And if you wish to proceed forward, then I would share that information with the entire board, because I think it's important for the entire board to understand, even though it's an individual appointment, meaning the nomination is made by the individual commissioner. I think it's important for the entire board to know whether or not there's any particular issues with this appointee. So let's go back. I just want to make sure everybody understood the point of this application process and the vetting process that we go through in regards to prior to you making the actual appointment. So let's go back to this first application. This one is really just to try to gauge an interest. So this is really the first application. We don't run background checks on everybody who's interested in a board. What we ask them to do is to fill out this, and this gives us general information regarding the individual, what boards they're interested in, and then ultimately, I believe Ms. Winchester attempts to share this with you all. there's multiple ways that this gets, these that we receive these applications. It may be that you as a commissioner refer them to us. It may be that it's just a citizen who is interested and they go online and find the application. And it may be that there's a recommendation from the board itself. And so ultimately, Ms. Winchester, I'm going to ask her to get involved in these conversations also. So Ms. Winchester, what do you do if you receive this application? Just let's talk this through the process.
Well, I see if there's actually an opening for the board that they've applied for, and then I would just share it with you all, highlight it, and then, follow up with you to see if that's someone you're interested in, if there is an opening for that. If not, if there's not an opening, then I would file this until there is an opening, unless you directed me otherwise.
And because there's multiple types of appointments, so like when you say you follow up, you might follow up with the individual commissioner if that's that commissioner's specific appointment, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Otherwise, if it's a generalized appointment, she may just share this information with you in your boxes or things of that nature to let you know this person is interested. So let's talk about when appointments come due. What is the current process? Right now, you maintain a list, correct, in regards to when the appointments come due? Just walk us through that process.
So I have a list, and I share that with you all, usually at the beginning of the year, just what's coming up for the year. And then I'll share it again later on. And then a lot of times I'll share your specific appointments. So if we're getting, a month out or so, then I may, talk to you about it, say you've got this coming up, and see if you're ready to move forward with a reappointment, or if you have someone that you're interested in that we would need to go through the background process.
So what's happened in the past that you as a board may or may not be interested in? So again, that's one part of the process you just described. Well, in the past, let's just say no commissioner has found somebody that's interested in the position. Let's just say Angie notified you or you knew that a position or an appointment was coming up. If there was nobody interested or if you were debating a couple different people, it really hasn't been an issue to table these conversations. And I want to point that out. In the past, and Tom, you and Mark Jones may jump in on this, it's been fairly common that if it was a new conversation or if a commissioner hadn't felt like that they've had enough time to vet or research that the question or the request just goes to the chair that can this be tabled. And what has happened in the past is deference has been given to the commissioner and the issue was tabled to the next meeting and then ultimately brought up again. And I've seen these items tabled. I mean, you try not to do this, but I've seen these items tabled multiple meetings for various reasons, because there's debate discussions about who the appointment may be, or just because you can't find anybody. And sometimes that's a task in itself to find somebody. And what I'm trying to find out is whether or not you as a board would like additional information. I'm trying to see if there's something that Angie can do to help with this situation. Again, you also see a lot of your appointments, it gets, the appointee really gets recommended by the board that they sit on. That's not uncommon. Now, does that mean you as the commissioners have to appoint that person? No, it just means that is a very common practice for multiple boards to basically write a letter for the agency that helps coordinate that board. Let's just use Recreation Advisory Board to be an example. They help coordinate that board to help reach out to that person and see if they're still interested. And if they're still interested, to send a letter to Angie to put in the agenda packets to say that they're interested in reappointing. And even then, at the end of the day, it's up to this board to take that recommendation or if you have someone else or if you want to give time for somebody else to apply, I always go back to the concept or idea, table the conversation until the next meeting. Uh, I'm trying to think, Andy, am I missing any other? Because there's not really one way this is done. It's as I'm assuming you're finding, it's a challenge, and it's probably, I'm sure you spend a little bit of time trying to find people willing to serve. And ultimately, there's no real one way that I'm aware of that gets accomplished. I mean,
I think what I would like to see, I know they fill out this,
Uh-huh.
but there's multiple applicants for a single position, then, if nobody on the board knows them personally, or, even if one person does and the rest of us doesn't, you know, how do we choose between one or two people? I think we need more information to pick the right person, not just a little blurb, name, address, and, where they work, and telephone number. That's basically what's on here. And any professional associations they're affiliated with. So, I hate to say it, but I'd like to talk to some of them. If there's multiple candidates, just have a conversation with a couple of them, or however many there are. I don't know how the other board members feel about that, but I have a problem blindly saying yes to somebody I've never met and never had any conversation with, or I don't know who they are.
So, how would you present that? Would that be something that you would table and reach out and make a phone call to the people with the phone number, or how are you?
We could do that. A lot of times I just see these,
Mhm.
when I'm here at the meeting. So, I don't know what the proper process would be for that.
I think I have seen in the past that if I think the commission, I think you're correct. Somebody should know who. If you don't, and I've seen in the past where I've seen a commissioner or two will speak up and go, "Oh yes, I know someone. So that's a good person," and then the conversation would just proceed forward with the appointment. Now, um, as far as being able to say that all five of you with that confidence, I'm really not sure what the process would be other than you tabling it and then following up with some type of phone call, or even sometimes I've seen board members talk to each other after, not obviously not three or more at a time, but individually to each other that, if, and I'm just going to use examples, if Commissioner Jones said they know this person and they would vouch for him and think they'd be a good board member, and another commissioner wanted time to think about it, then I would highly encourage that commissioner to talk to Commissioner Jones while the issue is being tabled so that you can maybe get more background on that individual or not. Um, you know, so that's addressing maybe a way to try to figure out who this person is. The second issue you brought up is about when you have multiple candidates. Okay, that's an interesting conversation too, because let's use the SCC trustee appointment coming up, but there's multiple candidates. How many applications are there now? Two. And so from that standpoint, there may be some thought as far as the board about who you put on the board of trustees for SCC. I'm throwing out concepts. This isn't a mandate of how you should look at this, but you would potentially think that you would want somebody that has an educational background or has been involved in education at some point, or has some familiarity with some type of institution or educational institution. There could be an argument that's who you should put there, and or somebody involved in workforce development. When I say education, I don't limit it to just being a teacher. I mean being involved in somehow or another improving the skill sets of a workforce or individuals, and that varies quite a bit across the board. A lot of people may work for companies that are involved in continuing education for their own employees, and they may have a connection to SCC because they were doing continuing education program. There's just so many ways to discuss that point. But I would think that you would want somebody for SCC that that has some type of experience or connection to trying to improve the training and education of individuals. But I, I defer that whole conversation back to the board. And then, so how do you vet the two applicants that you have? How do you find that information? Like that's kind of going back to your point that you don't necessarily have that in front of you.
Right.
Because right now, the two applicants, do you have that
I don't have them with me.
with you? Okay.
Tracy Powell and Howard Owen.
Yeah.
Tracy Powell, she served on the board of Lee County Technical College for most of her 35-year career. So, input to lead trade education and skill needed to serve the community.
Excuse me, Commissioner Smith, I can't hear what you're saying. It's not audible.
That's Tom, not me.
Striblin, Mr. Commissioner Striblin.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Jones, that's because I had my mic muted. I didn't realize it. But Tracy put on hers at the bottom, Tracy Powell, interested in serving the following. She put in there that she served on the board for Lee County, Florida Technical College for most of her 35-year career to serve my community, give input and need in the trade, education, and skills needed to serve the community. That's a nice little remark. You know, to where the other didn't really say a whole bunch about what they've done or what their past in serving on this particular board of trustees, you know? Not making any sense?
I think having more information for the other is important. I think it's on us to go to, reach out and make contact with that person and see if there's any additional information prior to having a vote. Or at least one of us needs to reach out so that we can vet a little more thoroughly, we're making the right decision.
Right. Yeah, and as Don said, it's our job to say,
Yeah.
oh, we want to table this, we need more information. So we just need to stick to our guns, and if we don't know, we just need to ask for some time and talk to them. Like last week, we had that issue. Talk to Tom, or whatever commissioner knows the appointee. If we have a problem with the applicant, if we have a problem with the applicant, but otherwise, Angie, you do a good job with this, and I appreciate it. From my experience, the guy that I appointed to one of my boards, it went smooth, so I appreciate that. But sometimes it does get hard to get up here and get the papers out of the box, and I will, and that's my fault because I'm busy. But it is our job to get the papers and to contact these people. So
It's not a matter of, whether you like the person or not. It's just a matter of finding out the information. For number one, are they qualified? And I know that's neither here nor there, but I don't know any of these people, so I would like to know who I'm appointing or who I'm voting to appoint.
Well, if I may, Mr. Chairman, a couple of the points have been nailed on. One is it's good to ask the commissioner who nominated an individual. If you don't know that individual personally, give me some history. When the commissioner nominates an individual for any committee or board, they're doing it for a reason. And so the information from a commissioner or commissioners nominating somebody is important. There was a lady on the Cashers Planning Council whom I did not know at all in my course of living in Cashers 30 plus years. And I went by her business, introduced myself, and had not one but two different conversations with her about just generalities, we're trying to figure out what her motivation was and interest was, and and she's been a volunteer to other entities, which I was aware of. Secondly, it's important to know the organization that is sending a letter of support or for a continued candidate to be renominated, as well as talk to a couple of Mr. Adams picked up the SCC trustees availability, and I said, let's talk to a couple of trustees, get the trustees kind of come to consensus on what they would like to see as an individual coming onto their board. So that's so going by and seeing and introducing the person, calling them, emailing them is important. I think that face to face, I would have never, I didn't think I would have ever nominated or supported that nomination until I went by and saw the lady at her business. That really answered my any question that I had regarding that nominee. But I think y'all hit the head. Talk to a commissioner. Go by, introduce yourself. Talk to the entity or the director or president of the entity that's requesting a commissioner nomination, and they can kind of tell you what they're looking for in a candidate for that particular organization, no matter what it is. There's nothing wrong with tabling. I can tell you, I have seen certain boards and for example, let me go back. Mark Letson and I, Chairman Letson and I have the opportunity of having two commissioners from District 4. Most of the time in my time as a commissioner, there was never a second person to give a inside comment on an individual. So the 4 commissioners would always look to me if I made a recommendation and say, Mr. Jones, are you comfortable with this person being on the ABC board or whatever it is? And because they did not know the individual and they're 45 minutes away from that person's business or kind of crossing paths on a daily basis. So there are ways to gain access to inside information to help you make the best decision as a commissioner and for the entity that is up for a nomination.
And I think, reaching out specifically within the Southwestern Community College Board of Trustees, Dr. Thomas, getting his opinion for what he needs on that board would be a good avenue.
And so there's really this is for general discussions with the group or board. This can be a continuing conversation. We'll attempt to, we'll follow through with the current process. And again, if there are additional questions or there wish to be tabled, I would just request that you ask either a commissioner or there's various ways, or you come back to staff afterwards and say, hey, Don, I don't know, or can we find additional information? I don't know a lot of these people myself. The reality is I see and I'm gonna, Ms. Winchester's from here, so she may know more of the folks than I do, but the reality is it does take a little bit of research if you don't have direct knowledge of some of these folks, or sometimes you have to rely on your fellow commissioner or someone else to give you a good reference for that individual, because it's impossible to know everybody.
Any additional comments from the board? Okay. Moving on to our fiscal year 23-24 budget revisions.
Mr. Chairman, I got a couple things here.
Okay.
I thought I did. Is that it? Nope. All right, so let's close that. Did you not open? Where'd you put it, Levin? Was it not in there? Nope. Did you put it on there? You didn't copy it to the thing, did you? All right. Go ahead. I'm gonna do real quick, and I'm gonna put it up on the screen for those of you, remote. This is just a summary that Darlene had put together, just to quickly go over some of the decisions we believe that's been made by the board. Now, there's some placeholders. So there's some placeholder amounts in here because there hadn't been direct decisions made by the board, but I'll put it up on the screen. Okay, so if it pleases the board, I'll just quickly go through this because this is the changes from the recommended budget and all the information has been provided to the board previously. As you can see, the at-risk veterans, the line item in the VSO officer's budget, adding $1,000. A couple of things, we did reduce the Dillsboro complex by $50,000 and the DO beam, the Department on Aging beams and the roof repair by 50. We don't know those costs until, some of those till the bids come in. Ultimately, the Christmas connection increased by 5,000. Reducing contingency by 33,303. If you recall, we talked about going ahead and ordering these code enforcement vehicles, so we removed those from next year's next year's budget. This is a placeholder, DSS contracted services for foster care. That's the idea of just putting $25,000 in there, the idea of paying some sitting services by the hour. We know that's not enough money if you replaced all services by the hour, but that's putting a placeholder in there just so that we can have these conversations in the next year. Also, you can see DSS stipend for foster care, $50,000. Again, placeholder for that amount. These are discussions that the board needs to continue. Mountain projects grants. Now remember we talked about reducing. We have to take that out of the budget and then you have to vote on that separate. So you can see that mountain projects grants reduced by 18,000 and then contingency increased by 18,617. So that's when you vote on it later, you're just basically putting it back in. And then rolling start, assuming that you vote favorable. Rolling start increased by $3,000. You can see an additional sheriff vehicle at $42,000 because of that added personnel. The added sheriff, detective, drug enforcement officer, and benefits of $69,303, and then the addition of United Christian Ministries of $5,000. And so that is a summary of the discussions that the board had previously, and there's needed additional conversations about DSS and stipends and things of that nature. But before we do that, Mr. Chair, I would throw it out to the board and see if there's anything else that needs to be discussed about these other issues.
Are there any questions from the board regarding our changes to this year's budget?
Those all look correct to me.
Yes, me as well. Just looking through my sheet.
So does the board wish to continue conversations about, at this meeting, about the DSS stipend conversation? How do we wish to continue those conversations? If so, I do have, I attempted to send out via email, and I know some of you don't check your emails consistently, but I wanted to maybe get this in your hands. If we continue the stipend conversation, I do recommend some changes that I've thrown out. I'd also recommend to me, I back up and go, is the board looking at an overtime conversation or stipend? And if you choose the stipend conversation, then what I recommend is I have a new policy that I would present to you just to discuss some issues. And then I would also recommend taking it back to Mr. Weatherford and him talking to management in regards to the stipend amounts, should there be shift differentials? These are things I'd want to talk to you about, but before we jump into those details, Mr. Chairman, I would, if this is something the board wishes to talk about, then I'd want to first talk about overtime versus stipend. And if we're going to the stipend side, then I'm ready to talk to you in more detail.
I feel like we're, in my opinion, leaning towards the stipend side. because we're already getting time and a half and comp time. So this is going to be in addition to that, correct?
I would agree with that statement.
Yes, sir.
So I think we can rule out overtime and focus on the stipend policy for that emergency temporary use.
Okay. So, is everybody, are we moving forward with that conversation?
Mark Jones didn't.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm gonna put this, I've got this digital, I'm gonna put it up online so you and Mark can see this, and I'm handing out hard copies to the board.
Okay.
Just bear with me.
Is this the same as the one that you and I had in an email?
It's the one that I sent to, I blind CC'd all board members, so you
Right.
should, so all board members should have gotten it.
Okay.
Martin, did you get that email? I'll pull it up online too.
The one from this morning?
Yep.
I hadn't checked email today. So.
Yes, sir, I received it.
But since I have it on here, I'll go ahead and just pull it up online. I think I will. Okay. So if you recall, the previous stipend conversation was talking about a single stipend for all shifts. Well, I would, if we're going down the stipend road, I would ask that the DSS director go back and talk to management and talk about should we have differentials between holidays, weekends, nights, and days? Because I do think I, as an employee, would view those differently, okay, as far as trying to encourage somebody to fill those slots. So as you can see online here, the single stipend was if we were going to look at a single stipend amount, but I'm going to go ahead and pull up the revised version. Just a couple differences is, if you recall before, it had shifts and it had one blank for a single stipend amount for all these different shifts. One other thing too I did add in is an additional paragraph, and I changed the language here for these two paragraphs: prorated stipend for incomplete shifts and prorated stipend for an employee that reaches 240, comp time of 240 and higher. Now, we talked about that, but I put in a prorated stipend for an incomplete shift just because, you know, sometimes maybe they can only do 4 hours. Sometimes maybe they have to split it up. So I've set it up that you can create a stipend amount and then it can just be split up in case they can't fill the whole shift. So what I ended up doing too, and again, I don't have approval from the DSS director, and management hadn't had a time to see this. And this is where I would say that this needs to go back and see if they make any recommendations. But the original shifts was from 5 to midnight and then midnight to 8. Well, what that did was that made the shifts off on the weekdays, meaning it made one shift a 7-hour shift and one shift an 8-hour shift. All I did was just change 30 minutes here each way, and it makes it a single. You're splitting that night up for weekdays equally. And then if you go on the weekends, the previous was 8 to 5, and it was split up where it wasn't even. The 8 to 4 to 4 to midnight, and midnight to 8, these are all 8-hour shifts. Okay, so by doing that, then what I would recommend is looking at what are the harder shifts to fill, and then that should be a higher stipend. And then, you know, at one point, we talked about potentially the maximum, I believe, was stated was the 120, but that was based on an 8-hour shift, okay? And so I would think that would be the max and that was what was requested. And Mr. Chairman, I believe that's what you had ended our last meeting on, saying that you don't know if you'd split the difference between that and 100 or 75 per shift. I would recommend those types of that type amount, if that's what the board wants to do, is to look at these harder shifts. But I wouldn't necessarily, I believe if you offered that stipend clear across the board for each of these shifts, then what you're going to find is, I believe employees are going to believe that that they're not making appropriate pay for the weekend if it's the same pay for that day shift. And I believe these shifts should be, I don't know what the right amount should be, less than what may be considered a harder day to fill, which is holidays and weekends. But right now, that's us guessing. That's the reason I recommend going back and saying, okay, and giving some direction to DSS management and saying, look, the Board of Commissioners are willing to look at a stipend. We would look at try to pay in premium at maximum based on this example on holidays and weekends, but then you need to recommend that you reduce it some for some of these shifts that would be considered less harder to fill, which they're all hard to fill, right? And remember, this is a stipend along their time and a half comp time. And then ultimately, if they reach 240, it would switch over to straight time and a half. Because right now, Mr. Chairman, I could not tell you that the number that we're talking about, the request was overtime. So anything that we're talking about now, that I just would like management to come back and give some thought to shift differentials.
Okay.
I'm talking about
I think
DSS
that's
management.
appropriate.
The one question I have, since it's an emergency temporary stipend, who defines the emergency? What constitutes an emergency?
Well, my point of the emergency, you could just call it I used emergency because that's when I was doing it under what I considered an authority. We can remove that word emergency if we wanted to and just call it temporary. The reality is I do want to point out this last sentence here. Jackson County reserves the right to suspend and or change this policy at any time. This is a temporary, we can change that to temporary policy this policy is intended to be temporary. And just kind of relate it, I was using the word emergency because of how it was presented to me and how it was being discussed with me.
Right, I just want to make sure that we didn't get into a situation where DSS thinks it's an emergency, and we're like,
Well, this is a temporary stipend policy specifically, and this is what I want to clarify because I know we are on YouTube and there will be employees looking at this. This is solely for providing foster care services. This isn't for on call. This isn't for other duties for social workers that tend to be called out in the middle of the night. This is specifically a response to the issue of DSS employees having to provide basically foster care services to children that cannot be placed. And these services are on basically a 24/7 shift. The reason we don't say Monday through Friday basically show a daytime shift, that's because we have employees that are working their regular jobs at that point that are watching the children. And then ultimately under this stipend, the other thing I would mention too is that hopefully we could continue to keep down. This would encourage more employees to participate. I'm talking about DSS employees. There is, without being able to discuss it publicly, there is quite a few employees that do not have large amounts of comp time built. So there is some room for that conversation to take place. But if we move forward and continue to leave in the 2 employees that are also recommended there, then hopefully that will offset some of the burden. Because right now, these employees that are watching these children are not doing their jobs. They're watching these children. So we're also leaving in the recommendation, the 2 additional employees that are specifically for child welfare issues to help offset the time spent for these employees during Monday through Friday during the regular working hours. And between that, hopefully these 2 new employees can help DSS to keep comp time down.
and even during the day shift, Friday, they can't do their job and watch the kids in time, and they can switch off,
Yeah.
distribute the load a little bit amongst other workers. It's not quite so busy. So, yeah,
it's, you know, right now, that's, and again, if you leave in those two positions, then it offsets, it provides two full-time positions to also, to help with the Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 conversation.
As you, Mr. Chairman, if I may, Mr. Adams, as you discuss these concepts with Mr. Weatherford, it'd be interesting to compare apples to apples with an outside agency. I don't have a clue of what a qualified outside agency might cost the county or social services, but it'd be interesting to hear numbers, and it doesn't have to be exact. It can be a range as you engage in conversations after our meeting today.
Absolutely. I think that's what that placeholder that I was mentioning before, again, that's not intended to say that's all it's going to cost at 25,000. It would be much more on a private agency side. What I'm looking to explore is also part-time. I mean, I think everything, Commissioner Jones, should be on the table in this conversation. And just so everybody knows, we're still waiting on responses, but I have directed Human Resources to research multiple counties in regards to, again, beyond the couple that I know that we're using as examples, but really research our entire region on how they're paying these individuals and what they're doing. But Commissioner Jones, I think, yes, you look at a private agency, but I think we should also try to explore part-time, direct part-time, and those types of services also. So I think long-term, you see counties that have been dealing with this long-term, they're utilizing all of the above. They're attempting to utilize all of the above.
Thank you.
Part-time, would we go through the temp agency or just direct?
It all depends on, right now, the way I was looking at it was direct part-time. What it does is it helps with, you know, again, you got to find somebody willing to work too, but it helps with liability insurance and it helps with us because they go through our vetting process and
Still the temp agency?
yes,
That's what I was
yeah,
thinking.
and
How well does the temp agency vet their people that they would be sending us?
but if they were our part-time employees, then it really would be decided by the DSS director who these people work, directly decided because it'd be their temporary.
'Cause I know there's a couple of agencies out there that do this type of work.
Yeah. And I think we should be willing, especially if we have morale and even you put in the stipends and you put in part-time, I think part-time monies, I think ultimately trying to develop, Commissioner Jones, those contracts that will be highly expensive for outside agencies, but we should still develop those contracts to, at some point, they may be the last resort, but we may have to use the last resorts in order to give relief to employees who just feel like they can't watch these children anymore, or they need respite.
Right, and I think no matter what agencies, if we decide to choose agencies, that it should come under the direction of the DSS. They know best.
I agree.
Okay. So,
All right. So we'll wait for more information and talk to Mr. Weatherford regarding that. Moving on to other business. Mr. Adams, we have one agreement addendum to discuss today.
yes, I have a couple items, and I do need to give a little bit of background on that, but before I do that, let me.
Chairman Letson, it's Mark. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
After the meeting's over, may I shoot you a quick call? I know you're on vacation. I
Sure.
don't want to bother you, but it won't take long.
No, that's fine.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So, Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Jones, Mr. Chairman, what I've just passed out, and unfortunately, I don't think I'll be able to put it up on the screen for you. This is under other business. I generally try not to bring up brand new stuff under other business, but this is a work session too, where votes aren't taken. But this is good news, what I just passed out. I've been informed yesterday that Dogwood Health Trust has granted Jackson County $368,429 from the Health Trust to help create our substance abuse recovery planning program for a 2-year period. What I just passed out to the board, and I'll provide to you and Mark via email, is just the information I've already provided to you that you approved for me to apply for these grants. And that's the detail of the budget and also the executive summary of the program. Just a reminder, what this does is allows us to hire a full-time substance abuse recovery coordinator for a 2-year period. It also provides monies for planning and for us to go through and try to create an overall master plan in the next couple of years of how to expend our opioid settlement dollars. And so it's just great news. It lines up directly with the sheriff's grant. And the reason I'm bringing this to you is I would request that the board, if you're comfortable with putting this on Tuesday's agenda for me to authorize the grant approval, because what that allow me to do is I can direct human resources to come back to you in mid-July and come back with the job descriptions and everything necessary for the jail coordinator position and for this substance abuse coordinator position to be approved, and then also start the hiring process. And the concept behind this is I would really love for this position, along with the jail coordinator position, to flow through at the same timeline. This position is a 2-year position, and the jail coordinator position is an 18-month position. And again, this isn't new to you. You'd already approved this grant. Just wanted to see if I could go ahead and follow through next Tuesday and bring it back before the board.
Is there consensus to bring this before the board on Tuesday?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay.
Is everybody good? This next one may take 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Does anybody need a break,
Okay.
or are we good to go?
No, we're good.
So this one, I need to give everybody a little bit of background and timeline. If you recall, mid-May, I brought to this board the memorandum of agreement between Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, the state of North Carolina, and the Jackson County. And ultimately, if you recall, at the time, we were talking about the Infinity Pool being part of the regional agreement. And where that concluded was that all the counties, this is 5-county regional agreement between the counties, the state, and Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. Just remember, this is an agreement that allows, that what it does is it authorizes the state of North Carolina and Jackson County Health Department, or Graham County Health Department, or Swain County Health Department, to go in onto tribal lands and to provide health department inspections. So that would include restaurant inspections, for us, pool inspections. We also included in there, I believe, information about communicable diseases and things of that nature. It was concluded that a separate agreement should be discussed in regards to that pool. And so at that point, it was also concluded at that meeting that what we were looking for potentially is for the state, for the county to be directed not to inspect the pool from the state, and that we are indemnified from the state, because there were some concerns in regards to liability and things of that nature. So that was expressed to the state and to the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians after that meeting. Ms. Shelley Caraway, our health director, followed through with that. And the last that I'd heard was the state was going to set up a meeting with the parties to begin discussing this. And honestly, we've been in budget and we've been in, we've been in all of these things. That wasn't something that was on my priority. I was waiting to be invited to this meeting. Well, I did get a phone call, or actually an email last week from Patrick Scott. And Patrick Scott is, we have Deborah online now, our county attorney, but Patrick is, y'all know Patrick, he's been serving when Deborah can't serve as our county attorney. Patrick is the one that was initially involved in this. I'm talking about from the beginning. And so I got an email from Mr. Scott last Thursday, as a matter of fact, stating that he received a phone call from counsel from the state of North Carolina and seemed a little bit of confusion, wasn't sure if everybody was aware of the indemnification things that we were looking for. And so last Friday, what I did was I ended up just really sending out information to all the parties, just reminding them where I thought we had left all this at, and that I was basically waiting for a meeting. I also expressed concerns about being able to get this accomplished in June because of timelines. And so as soon as that was a Friday, and ultimately what the state ended up doing was sending out and setting up a conference call of all the parties, really a Zoom meeting of all the parties Monday morning, right? And so Monday morning, ultimately we ended up bringing in our attorney, myself, state general counsel, DHHS, also the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, their secretary of DHHS. And as we went through and started discussing these items, ultimately, there was from the state level and the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, they were looking to try to get this addendum done prior to the end of June. And so that's what has occurred in the past day. There's been a flurry of conversations, really, a day and a half now. Flurry of conversations between council, between state agencies, between the state and Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and our council. And the primary goal that I had for Jackson County, remember, going back to the two issues we're really dealing with here. One is the primary goal when I was looking at this agreement and the direction that I gave to our legal was we needed to make sure if we're going to move forward with this, that we're identified legally, and ultimately that, we were looking for the state or somebody to show that I don't know if ordered not to inspect is a too strong of a word, but some real direction from the state that pool is to not be inspected. Okay. Now, just to back up a little bit, make sure we understand our relationship with the state of North Carolina. We are an arm of the state of North Carolina as it comes to these types of regulations. Very similar to DSS in the sense that these state regulations are being enforced, whether it be pool inspections, restaurant inspections, things of that nature. We are an arm of the state, meaning we partner with the state in regards to enforcement. If we get sued, if we get into litigation, sometimes it involves both parties because we technically, I don't want to go too far off on a tangent, but if you're not aware of this, counties are legally an extension of state operations. That's what we are. Municipalities are not. They're truly separate entities, okay? And so there is some requirements for us when we start working down our health department functions for us to enforce these rules. So the reality is that liability is one thing. If we get sued or somebody slips and hits their head, we want to make sure we're covered. But we're also trying to cover the fact that ultimately we are responsible for enforcing these state rules, and we were looking for some type of language that basically says we're not either allowed to or we shouldn't. Okay. And so ultimately what's happened is it was discovered when our council worked with the state council, because we're an extension of the state, it really didn't make sense for the state to indemnify. It's because we're combined with the state anyways. And really it wasn't really the state's not authority to tell us not to enforce these rules. It's really the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians authority. So the concept that really has come together now, and I'm going to pass this out after I give general concept, is that ultimately the addendum basically states a couple of things. One is we're recognizing the authority of the state of North Carolina, the authority of Jackson County, and recognizing that Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians is a sovereign nation. Okay? The other thing is it's stating that the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians is not authorizing the state of North Carolina and or Jackson County to inspect that pool, be on site of that pool, to do anything with that pool. And then at the end of the day, what's happening is that the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians completely indemnifies us if anything happens. Meaning, if somebody gets hurt, if they get sued, if anything happens on that pool, then it becomes the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians that actually has to pay for that lawsuit and any losses there if they attempt to try to sue Jackson County on this. The other thing too that's in this agreement that I'll point out, the proposed agreement, by the way, is that the state of North Carolina recognizes that they cannot order us because the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians is basically stating that we're not allowed to go in and inspect that pool. At that point, the state of North Carolina cannot instruct Jackson County to inspect that pool, and Jackson County is not allowed to inspect that pool. All right, and so that's a quick summary of it. But what I'll do is let me pass it out to you, and I'll bring it up online because what I'm trying not to do is read verbatim. I'm going to point out some sections to you. Okay. Okay. So I do have this up online, and Mark, I tried to email this to you just in case you wouldn't be able to read it here. But as you can see, this is a proposed agreement addendum to the memorandum of agreement between the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, North Carolina Division of Public Health, and Jackson County. This is an addendum to the regional agreement, but the parties of this addendum are only these entities named. Again, you can see does describe who's all involved in this addendum on the first paragraph. Next one is recognize the tribe as a federally recognized Indian tribe enjoying a government to government relationship with the United States. It recognizes the division and the counties or agencies of the state of North Carolina. Recognizes the state of North Carolina through the Division of Counties has the lawful authority to apply and enforce health and sanitation laws of North Carolina on tribal lands with the consent of the tribe's governing body. Recognizes that the tribe has consented for the state of North Carolina to apply and enforce state health and sanitation laws. And it does say whereas it does recognize just the state laws and divisions here for this paragraph of what allows us to proceed forward. It talks about here perform all sanitation inspections of adult day services, bed and breakfast homes, bed and breakfast inns, child care facilities, food establishment, institutions, local confinement facilities, and lodging facilities, primitive experience camps, public swimming pools, residential care facilities, schools, summer camps, tattoo artists on tribal lands. So that's what our main MOA said. Just remember, this doesn't just involve the larger one, it involves other counties. Primarily, it's Jackson and Swain counties that conduct the most inspections there. Cherokee has some too, but then you start getting into Graham and Haywood do a little bit. They have a few, but not nearly as many as Jackson and Swain County does. And so you can see that the just talking about environmental health and communicable disease on the people of tribal lands. And then it just says, and whereas in order to further collaborate between the tribe, division, and the counties in order to protect health, safety, and welfare of people of tribal lands, the following is agreed to. It does talk about here, this first paragraph, It states, it specifically talks about there's rooftop pool at the casino, but this sentence right here, the tribe accepts sole responsibility for the rooftop casino pool, meaning that the tribe does not authorize, invite, or allow Jackson County Department of Public Health, the division, or any other North Carolina county or state agency to inspect a rooftop casino pool for the purpose of operation, maintenance, or regulation. I can tell you that's where this started off, but the B and C is where our legal stepped in and requested some additional language. And so you can see B, to that end, the division acknowledges as a state that it does not have the authority to direct the county as an agent of the division to inspect a rooftop casino, the pool. So in essence, the tribe saying state or any subsets of the state's not allowed to inspect the pool. The state is basically telling us so they can't direct us to inspect the pool. And then ultimately, you can see the final C is the indemnification letter or language that our attorney had worked through along with the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians that indemnifies us for anything associated with that pool. And then at the end of the day, the rest of it is just basically finalizing our agreement. But the two paragraphs we were very specifically interested in was B and C, and that's ultimately, we believe what this does is it pretty much directs us in the state that we cannot in any form, fashion, inspect that pool. The state cannot come back to us if we don't do certain things, if we don't follow through with certain state regulations enforcement, then there's potential consequences to Jackson County financially. So that is the reason we wanted to put in B, is the state recognizes that they can't force us to do this. We're putting that in there to just make sure there's no financial consequences to us. And then C indemnifies us. And so where we're at right now, it has been requested that this board consider this. Ultimately, the drive or push from the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians is to move forward with the regional agreement, which authorizes all the other inspections, but also to move forward with this side agreement that would basically allow them to open and operate that pool. And the timing of this, this is something that has been brought up to this board before, but that's the whole point of me bringing up why I'm coming to you so quick, is because this was put on my table last Thursday.
I think that the indemnification is solid. I feel like it removes us from any liability potential, or even the other counties as well, seeing that the state is recognizing that the tribe is an individual what was the term they used? A sovereign nation. So the only question I would have is, does it only, and it kind of states that in this, just the one pool that doesn't meet regulations for the state, the one rooftop pool, or is it all pools that are public?
It's specifically this pool.
Okay. I have no problem moving forward with this. And does the board have any questions?
I don't have a problem with it either, Mr. Chairman.
I had the same question. We decided to build another one down in Murphy.
Right. It clears that one out. They have to follow the regulations or indemnify Cherokee County when that comes up.
They'd have to handle that separately. It has nothing to do with this. This specifically is attempting to ensure that we are protected as a county in regards to this specific pool, and then recognizing their sovereignty as a tribal nation.
Right.
It's great to me.
Okay. Is there a consensus to put this on the board schedule for next Tuesday?
Is that when the
Yes.
other agreement comes out?
Okay. Well, then we'll move
the
forward
MOA?
with it.
I'll bring the MOA back to you all, just a reminder, because what they're gonna do, you'd already passed the MOA, the regional, but I'm gonna bring it back to you just as a reminder, because the other thing too, Mark, is, they're gonna want a DocuSign on that.
Okay.
Okay, instead of the wet signature that you had signed afterwards, and so let me just bring the whole package back together, one pack, put it in front of everybody, and then that way, just we'll redo everything, and nothing has changed. It's my understanding on that MOA, regional MOA agreement, nothing has, nothing has changed, and if it has, it's gonna be very minor, like a word or two, but I don't think it
Right.
has changed.
That sounds great. And I can DocuSign that as soon as it's
Okay.
passed.
Okay. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman, under other business.
With no further business, I'll seek a motion for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
And a second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
None opposed. We will meet again next Tuesday at 6:30.